This is Tuhon Aditya from LightHaven. Today we are going to go over the concept of every thrust is followed by a slash and every slash is followed by a thrust. I've made two similar videos on this topic. Those are specifically focusing on medium range, and they also gave a couple of medium range thrust and slash drills. I would recommend having a look at that either before or after this video because it sort of joins into what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to leave the links to both of those things down below. Before we begin though, it would mean a lot if you would subscribe to the channel. At the end of the video, if you like what you saw, if you learned from what you saw, please do like and share this video. If you have anything to add to the discussion, please leave that in the comments down below. If you have any requests or questions, anything for future videos, please also leave that in the comments down below. All of these things really do help out the school and the channel a lot. We've also restarted our residential program, so if you would like to come to Goa and train Pekiti with us in person, live here, train with us 7 hours a day, please check out the link I'm going to leave down below and get in touch with us. Firstly, one of the major things to understand when we're talking about thrust and slash within the Pekiti context is this concept of infinity of motion. When we're looking at two of our most major or common lines of attack and counter-attack within this art, when you're talking about your diagonal lines, whether you're going back to your chambered position or not going back to your chambered position, if I'm just here in the air, or if I am doing my circular lines, these lines are very important because they go on for infinity, right? I can just keep going here without any sort of break in motion. I don't have to reset, I don't have to do anything. These lines, just by virtue of the shapes that we're making, they're always going to keep going and going and going and going, which is super important. In a weapon art where very often my hand is a major target when I'm fighting somebody, I don't want my hand to be still for too long, right? I want my hand to continue to move, to move, to move, to move. Just for that alone, these lines become super important, that my hand at least is in constant motion. Now, that isn't the only way this is used, but that's one of the basic ways that I use these lines to introduce to beginners the concept of infinity of motion and to continue moving your hands. Within the thrust and slash context, if every thrust is followed by a slash and every slash then is followed by a thrust, I can continue this sort of it can almost becomes a cinemalia or a weave of its own. I can continue this sort of weaving motion, making a net in front of me. It becomes sort of like a ever-evolving, ever-moving guard that my opponent has to then find a way to penetrate, right? Just by virtue of me doing this, it means that I'm constantly providing my opponent with some sort of threat. Now, of course, it has to be done in the right way. It can't just be done flippantly in the air. It doesn't have any use there. There's a context and a way to use these things. But if every thrust is followed by a slash and every slash then becomes followed by a thrust, then there becomes like this infinity of attacks. I'm constantly on the offense, constantly on the offense. And at least for me, I prefer it that way. I prefer setting the pace, prefer having the initiative than being on the back foot. And that concept of infinity of motion, infinite attacks, or every single movement becoming part of a larger attacking sort of plan helps me a lot when I'm fighting. And as a concept, I think it's really, really important within Pekiti. The other thing to understand is that there are many ways that this concept can play out. Most often you see this either within medium range, where you have this drill, where you're going thrust low, slash, thrust medium, slash, thrust high, slash, or you see it a lot with knives. But the same concept can be applied throughout whatever weapon category you use. It can even be applied empty hands, where if I treat my uppercut almost like a thrust, and then I come back with that hammer fist, then that becomes my thrust and my slash. My thrust is followed by my slash. It also depends upon things like range. The way that I am going to use this concept at long range would be very different from the way that I use this at medium range and the way that I use this in close range. Now, each of these things can be whole separate videos and whole separate discussions on their own. I have made a couple of videos on thrusting and slashing within medium range. Like I said earlier, I'll link that down below. I'm not going to get into the specifics of each range. I just want to talk generally about, continue this conversation about this concept, because I'm very often seeing a lot of misconceptions or absolutes when it comes to this concept, that this can only be used this or it must be used like this. And I really want to just delve deeper into that discussion. Let's talk a little bit about why you would want a thrust to be followed by a slash or a slash to be followed by a thrust. Now please understand that I am not saying that every single time you slash or every single time you thrust it should be followed by a slash. I am not saying that. Again, it depends a lot upon the specific context of what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, what your opponent is doing, a whole bunch of things. But in the larger concept, let's just talk about why you would want a thrust followed by a slash and a slash followed by a thrust. The simplest way to explain it, or the simplest thing, would be a timing issue. I can, if I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, if that is the tempo of my strikes, if I add a thrust in there, because from here coming back is faster than from here taking it onto the other shoulder and then cutting, I can then start hitting those half beats as well. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 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 2, 3, 4. So you can see that now I'm hitting those half beats. With the thrust, I'm able to insert an attack within that half beat, and it can become very useful. It can be a very useful addition to your arsenal, especially when you want to break the rhythm of your opponent. When you set them up according to a certain rhythm, either through your actions or you recognize their rhythm, you can just insert a sneaky little thrust in there or a sneaky little slash in there. Insert that within the beats of their rhythm. The other thing that a thrust followed by a slash can do is a thrust can also sometimes be used almost like a parry. I can use, if imagine an angle is coming and angle 1 is coming from there, I can use that thrust as I step out. Of course, footwork is super important over here. As I step off line, I use that thrust to parry, and now I have that opening where the stick is somewhere here and I have nothing between their head or their body and their hand, and then that slash will get there faster than any recovery that he might have or his other hand. So again, if there's an angle 1 coming from there, I'm stepping off line. As I step off line, I'm using that thrust to parry that stick away, and then I'm immediately coming back with that slash. So now I've used my thrust as a parry, and I've used that sense of inserting an attack within that tempo, within that rhythm. On that half beat, that becomes my slash. Now from here, I have an option. I don't have to come back with the thrust again, even though maybe that might be open over there. I can come back with a slash. That's what I mean. You don't have to always follow these things up. It's just, it helps sometimes. Especially at long range, when I'm looking to bridge from long range to maybe medium range or close range, I cannot do these tight thrusts and slashes. I need to be more open. I'm never going to reach them if I stay tight. That's a medium range to medium to close range sort of drill. At long range is long range because you are having to extend. You're extending, that hand is that specific target, right? So at long range, again, this line or this line is faster to execute than having to go across on the other shoulder. So every now and then, if I just use this line to step in behind their attack, parry, and that becomes my entry into the medium range to cut that neck this way. Maybe I need to tap that hand because it's going to come back with an angle 2. Doesn't matter. At long range, I'm using these extended slashes followed by thrust that can follow a slash again, slash followed by a thrust that can follow another slash. But because I'm following this line, this straight line, as opposed to going to the other shoulder, I'm able to do it faster, but I'm still maintaining that sort of infinity of motion concept where my stick or my sword or my knife can constantly be in motion in this line. I don't have to stop it to change it to go anywhere else. It can just constantly, there's a lot of options within just this line, And medium range, also what it does is it makes sure that my point, that my tip is always facing my opponent, as opposed to me having to go chamber and then come back. At medium range, that's too big a motion, and that gives too much of an opportunity for your opponent to attack. If I go thrust followed by a slash, my weapon is always facing my opponent. It's always keeping that sort of offensive distance between me and my opponent that he has to deal with. One last way that you can explore this concept is when you're talking about faking. And you'll see this a lot of times with the knife. Especially, this is one of the main principles that makes the knife tapping drill work. This is one of the main principles behind that knife tapping drill. When I am thrusting high and someone taps their hand or stops their hand and I want to go low, that's where my thrust is followed by a slash, and later I can use this almost as a fake. I can fake a high thrust to go to a low slash, then come back with an attacking thrust to a slash to a thrust. So once again, I'm going to fake that high thrust, or if I have a weapon and someone tries to stop this arm, I fake it, I see that motion coming, or I feel it, I immediately switch to that low slash. That's why in knife tapping you go across, because as soon as someone feels the hand and they try and slash your stomach, you can then follow that. If I am here, if I go same hand, if the knife is coming from here and I stop it with the same hand, it's easier to go under. Whereas if I go across, one of the reasons we go across is because when he switches that thrust into a slash and he goes below, it's easier to follow that knife by keeping it away from your body if I'm doing this. So in conclusion, you can use that thrusting and slashing principle to maintain that sort of infinity of motion, that you're constantly moving your hand, your weapon is constantly in motion, and I can throw many attacks in a shorter period of time. I can look to break that tempo of whatever metronome or whatever tempo that the fight is going at, that your opponent is using, that you are using. You can use this to break it because you can insert it on the half beat. It's a quicker motion than going across. At medium range, it can be used almost like a constantly evolving, constantly moving guard. It's like a net of safety of offense and counter offense that you're weaving in front of you, that your opponent has to deal with. Your tip is constantly pointing at your opponent and you're not leaving any of these big openings. At long range, you can be using that thrust to parry followed by that slash, and you can also use that thrust to a slash in sort of this faking or feinting principle, where I'm faking the thrust, faking the high thrust, going down for the low slash. You can, even within our draw to draw drill, you have the opposite as well, where I'm faking that low thrust. As soon as I feel the hand coming up, I switch it to a slash. So I fake and I go up. This is a super effective entry from the draw to draw drill as well, and it follows that same, every thrust is followed by a slash principle. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, if you learned from what you saw, please do like and share this video. If you have anything to add to the discussion, please leave that in the comments down below. If you have any questions or requests for future videos, please also leave that in the comments down below. Please subscribe to the channel. All of these things really do help out the school and the channel a lot. We've also restarted our residential program, so if you want to come to Goa train Pekiti with us in person, please check out the link down below, get in touch with us. Thank you and see you in the next video.